Welcome to the class. Today we are going to talk about certain aspects of language learning. There are certain things about language learning that teachers must know, that practitioners, professionals dealing with language teaching and language learning must know. In this class, we are going to talk about those things to you, primarily because we thought even learners must know about these things. We have been practicing these things as an underlying theme, as current underlying discourse for helping you learn or improve your English. Therefore, at this stage, we decided that we will talk about these things to you so that you can see, evaluate, understand, and apply them to your own learning hereafter. You have gone through a lot of things about learning in language. You know a lot of things about learning. In this class, we are talking about learning of English language. We want to talk to you with examples about the things that help us improve our language. We need to understand how to improve our accuracy. Accuracy comes from understanding structure. And it is accuracy alone in learning English in particular, or for that matter, learning any language in general, what gives us confidence. If we need to sound confident, if we need to sound impressive in a language that we are learning, we are improving for ourselves, one key factor in that effort is accuracy. Only with maintaining accuracy, we are going to sound confident. This is undisputed fact. We want to understand now, we know very well that we need to learn a new language to communicate with people, those who speak that language. Namely, if I know English well, then I communicate with English speakers, that is, anybody who speaks English well. To do so, I need to keep my own language accurate, my own language impressive through my accuracy. This is undisputed. In order to move through that facet, we believe it will help to add understanding of pragmatic competence with communicative competence for achieving communicative confidence. So we have been talking about communicative competence. Today, we are going to bring in communicative competence, language competence, along with pragmatic competence. And we will tell you about these things. And to put all these things together, we are working on building communicative confidence. You can find three terms: communicative competence, linguistic competence, and pragmatic competence in literature if you read about them. However, communicative confidence is my term that I have developed in my practice of research and teaching. It simply means communicative competence, linguistic competence and pragmatic competence together builds communicative confidence for the learners of a target language. So, let me move and tell you about it. In the process of language learning, what is it that is of paramount significance? It involves two parts. One is grammatical competence and communicative competence. It is grammatical competence, namely grammatical accuracy, which comes from understanding subconscious computation in our mind, which is known as linguistic competence. So, the terms like linguistic competence, grammatical competence, they mean the same thing. Or when we say computation in our subconscious, they all mean the same thing. We need to add pragmatic competence with that, which are important for learning of language, learning a new language. So, until now, we have been building linguistic competence in English, and now, today, we are going to bring in elements of pragmatic competence to help you build it further hereafter. I want to add here that these two parts, linguistic competence, that is grammatical competence, grammatical accuracy, as well as pragmatic competence, function together. Linguistic competence in literature is also known as I language. I language means internal language, that language that is internal to human mind. In other words, again, it refers to the subconscious processing, subconscious computation of language. And the other term is performance, which is also known as e-language, that is external language, that is the language that we use to communicate. So, this distinction is subtle, and all we need to know about this distinction is language internal to human mind is something that we haven't used so far. That is, we haven't started speaking. The moment we start speaking, that becomes e-language. So, hopefully, this distinction is clear to you. We are only saying that the two needs to come together. Only then we learn the target language. We need to put them together, and then it works. It works for learning. Learning of language includes aspects of both. We are going to show you some examples from English and Hindi in particular, and then you can look at examples from languages that you speak and contrast and compare them with English examples to see whether what we are going to tell you makes sense or not, and see how that helps in your own learning, whether understanding about these things has any contribution in learning or not. You will be the judge for that. So, we'll talk about few things related to that. At this point, we need to know some of the scholars who have talked about these things in literature. There is a very famous person who has worked on language from the perspective of learning, acquisition and education. He is M.A.K. Halliday. In a very famous paper in 1993, he points out that when we learn language, that is, the process of learning of language is not simply engaging in one kind of learning among many. Rather, They are learning the foundation of learning itself. That is, the ontogenesis of language is at the same time the ontogenesis of learning. In short, if we want to understand that, he is trying to say understanding the embedded process of learning language is also about learning the process of learning itself. Therefore, he says, learning of language, that is when we learn language, this understanding this process is not just understanding one among many things that we learn. We learn many things in our lives. We learn to speak, we learn to swim, walk, cycle, drive a car. Some people learn to fly a plane. Some people learn to cook, dance, music, singing. So, learning language is not just one among all other kinds of learning. What he says, learning language is making an effort to trying to understand underlying aspects of language learning is one, not just one among many other learning, rather it is learning about learning itself. I hope this is clear. This is just this part is just to tell you how important it is to understand how we learn. In particular, how we learn language. We know that we are watching structural aspects of language. We have looked at several nuanced aspects of different structural patterns in English. If you calculate your experience of learning so far, you are going to say what Mark Kremings in Routledge's Encyclopedia of Philosophy says about language. It is, language is an impressive and fascinating human capacity, and human languages are strikingly powerful and complex system. It's not just, when you understand this, we begin to believe that it is not possible to learn the underlying structural nuances by practicing parroting, that is, practicing like a parrot. That's not possible. The only thing that works for learning of language, either as a child or as an adult, is when we understand the nuanced pattern, nuances of underlying patterns of language. Then we understand how it works, how it functions, and such understanding starts showing impact, yielding when we speak the language. There is no alternative to this. Understanding this has dramatic impact on learning. We have been telling you these things time to time. Today, we are talking about that in a systematic way, and we are going to show you just some examples on the basis of that. So, look at the following things that some other scholars have talked about language. For example, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin says, man has instinctive tendency to speak, as we see in the babbles of our children, while no child has instinctive tendency to bake, brew, and write. Please note the distinctions that Darwin is talking about. He is saying instinctive tendency to speak. This is the fundamental capacity that we are born with. He's talking about this instinctive is related to our cognition. It's it's related to our mind. So he's talking about when it comes to speak, it's about human mind. And he says that we notice that right from the beginning, children start to babble when they have not even started speaking sounds. Even the babbling tells you that children are, the newly born baby is going to speak. Whereas we don't see such instinctive tendency among children to bake, brew, and write. Very, very carefully picked up activities that children get involved with in learning. Remember, just now we were talking about Halliday. Halliday says, learning to understand about language, understanding what goes in language learning tells us that language learning is not one among many learnings. The language is unique, language learning is unique, other things are not. And Darwin puts them to bake is one kind of learning. To brew, we brew coffee. To make cake is one. To brew coffee is one. And to write is another one. So please keep in mind, learning to speak is, learning to speak is different from learning to write. When we talk about language learning, we talk about skills like speaking, reading, writing, reading. We talk about 4 skills: L, S, R, W: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Among these, writing is very different. Reading and writing are connected, because once you know how to write, you also learn to read, and the other way around. Point is, speaking is very different from writing, as even Charles Darwin makes. We know there are thousands of people, thousands of speakers of all languages of the world who speak but don't write. It never happens that you know how to write but you don't speak the language. Speaking is instinctive. Speaking is genetically designed. Human beings are genetically designed to speak natural language. Whereas we need to learn additionally to write. Therefore, what we come to conclude as language is one of the languages is the most sophisticated activity of human mind. Among many other activities that human mind performs, language is one of the most complex and sophisticated activities that happens in a human mind. Therefore, paying attention to its computation is crucial. I keep underlining this so many times. I aim to hammer it so that we do not skip those patterns. And the development, however, what is crucial in building this capacity of language is input from our society. That is, we need to hear, we need to train our ears with the sounds which will work as input for the purpose of learning. The more input we provide through our ears in our mind, the processing becomes faster and they yield the results in a faster way. This part is again a very significant part for all of you to keep in mind. Next, when we move, for a long time, learning of language was really considered a pattern drill situation, stimulus and response activity. It was like we hear something and we practice that and we learn to speak. This was a long-term scientific understanding and long-term scientific belief. This is also known as psychological foundation of understanding language. Whereas in 1957, Chomsky brought in certain ideas, and that changed our understanding of the entire process of language learning. And he asked certain epistemological questions. And these questions, some of the questions that come out of his work are listed here. What constitutes our knowledge of language? That is, when we become the speaker of a language, what constitutes that knowledge? How is that knowledge acquired? He is particularly talking about children. Let's keep in mind that we are talking about learning of language for adults. That is, you are making an attempt to learn and improve your English as a target language as an adult. Chomsky was talking about learning or acquisition of language for children, very, very nascent infants, early acquisition for children. You know that by 4 or 5 years after birth, children start speaking the target language, the language from the immediate society. So, it is understanding that process, uncovering that process, and applying some of them to the process of learning for adults is going to help us in learning. That's what we have been trying to do for you. So he asked the questions that what constitutes that knowledge? How is that? What constitutes the knowledge? How is that knowledge acquired? And how is that knowledge put in practice? What is it? How is it acquired? And how is it put in practice? That is, how we develop it here in our mind, and then how we start using them. Chomsky is asking for children. How do children acquire and how do they put to use? The underlying theme of entire research in Chomskyan paradigm is that. So he brings in certain aspects and we will talk about some of them to you. And that becomes the foundation of understanding language for children. We pick things up from there and see how many of them are applicable for learning as an adult. And this is what we are putting in to understand the third part. Third question is applicable. Chomskyan third question is applicable for adults also. That is, how is this acquired knowledge put in practice? So we understand that initial impression of a stimulus and response. As you know, stimulus is we give something and response is when we take it out. So input and output, that is, response is equivalent to stimulus or output is equivalent to input. That theory was rejected. That is, language learning is a matter of habit formation was rejected. Meaning, it doesn't work merely through practice. Therefore, language is not merely a matter of habit formation. What happens in learning is this computation of language is part of generative mechanism, that is part of human mind. This computation happens in human mind. This is the part which psychologists missed, which Chomsky brought in. So here the point is, when we hear, when we talk to people, we keep telling you to listen to news, to read books, to spend half an hour time in reading and listening. Now you can see why we say that. We are saying that because that will work as input for you. That is going to be imperfect. That imperfect simply means it is not directed towards learning. It's fuzzy. Meaning, again, it's not very clear. So, imperfect and fuzzy stimulus will yield perfect learning. It does yield to perfect learning for kids. We hope that some parts of it will yield to perfect learning for grown-up adults as well. And therefore, we talk about language computation, which is generative mechanism of human mind. So, as a child, we develop knowledge of language from that computation, and children automatically derive underlying rules that we are making effort to learn. And that happens through the computational mechanism for children. They do it in a subconscious process. We need to do it through conscious process. Therefore, we need to know about those mechanisms. So, when we try to understand the knowledge of language, it's a technical term. And we can define it that it consists, it's about underlying rules that we know, but we don't know that we know them. This is about first language learning. So, we don't know that we know all the rules of our first language. In English, in learning of English, we need to uncover those rules that we know to learn them in a conscious fashion, to help us produce, so that when we learn these underlying rules, we can produce sentences and we can enable ourselves to separate grammatical sentences from ungrammatical patterns, from ungrammatical ones. And that will result into speaking grammatical sentences. So now I want to give you some examples of that. So, you see, let me talk about two examples from Hindi. Two nuanced examples that children learn without any specific instruction. All of us learn without knowing what we are learning. And these things we need to underline for learning English. In English, about English, we need to underline these things. So let's first understand. I'm going to describe two sentences to you in Hindi. Please look at this slide carefully, and you will get the point, the main point underlying these two sentences, even if you do not understand Hindi. I'm using Hindi only as an example. So, please see, I'm not writing anything in Hindi on this slide. I'm using sort of phonetic transcription for explaining these things to you. So, the first sentence is, Raju ke paas do bacche hain. You ask any speaker of Hindi, if you are one, you check it for yourself. If you are not, ask any speaker of Hindi. Raju ke paas do bacche hain is not good sentence. Therefore, we have put these star marks here. That means not grammatical. But if we say Raju ke do bacche hain, that's a good sentence. But so Raju has 2 kids. This is an English sentence that we want to say. Raju has 2 kids. In Hindi, we say the same thing. Raju ke do bacche hain. We don't say Raju ke paas do bacche hain. You see how you read this? This first word is Raju. This ke is a possessive pronoun. Ke paas is also possessive pronoun. Do means 2. Bacche means kids. Hain is are. Literally meaning 2 kids are near. This ke paas literally means near in the sense of belonging. So we say 2 kids are near Raju, meaning Raju has 2 kids. But ke paas as a post position cannot be used in this sentence. Otherwise, the sentence becomes ungrammatical. We can only use ke. Raju ke do bacche. Look at the second sentence. We can say Raju ke paas do gaadiyan hain. Look at this again. Raju, this ke paas as possessive pronoun. Do, 2 cars, gaadiyan hain are. So, hain are gaadiyan, cars, do, 2. So, Raju has, when we want to say Raju has 2 cars, we have to say Raju ke paas do gaadiyan hain, not Raju ki do gaadiyan hain. What do we watch? When we see these 2 English sentences, Raju has 2 kids and Raju has 2 cars, we see in both the sentences we are using has as auxiliary and the sentence has similar patterns. But in Hindi, the structure of sentence makes a distinction between 2 markers depending upon what we are talking about having. If we are talking about having 2 kids, we have a different post position. If we are talking about having 2 cars, then we have a different post position. In other words, what we are talking about having with Raju has implications for grammatical structure in Hindi, not in English. Likewise, there are so many things in English which are not applicable to Hindi, or for that matter, the languages that you speak. What we speak as our first language has a lot of implications for our learning of a new language. So, if we are aware of these distinctions, we don't need to know every single distinction, but if we are aware of these distinctions, then we end up becoming a better learner, a better speaker. Then the rule will apply. The more we know, the better a speaker we are. This is what we mean when we say learning language includes acquisition of inbuilt socio-cultural context. So we not only need to know grammatical patterns, we not only need to know grammatical patterns for attaining accuracy. To attaining higher degree of accuracy, we need to know inbuilt socio-cultural context. It's not a complex thing. It's a very, very simple thing. Like I said, take these 2 Hindi sentences. Talk to any Hindi speaker if you are not the one yourself. And you will get to find out without effort, any Hindi speaker will say these things to you. That is, inbuilt socio-cultural context is already developed in them as the speaker of that language. So, naturally what follows is, if we want to become a better speaker of a new language, namely English, then we need to develop not only accuracy for grammatical patterns, but also for inbuilt socio-cultural stuff. For example, we need to know that this K pass or K distinction is not applicable in English. We are fine in saying Raju has 2 cars or Raju has 2 kids. They are fine. That is not to say speakers of English don't make a distinction between kids and cars. In Hindi, we make a distinction between kids and cars in our language structure. But in English, this distinction is made in human cognition, but not in this structure. That's the point that we need to know about the differences between our languages and the new language, the target language, namely English, that we are learning here. Let me tell you another example of similar sort. Again, 2 very simple sentences from Hindi, and see how they compare and contrast with Hindi, and what is it that we learn from these 2 sentences, and how we make best use of this understanding for learning English. When we say Raju kalam chahta hai, check with a Hindi speaker. Some speakers of Hindi will tell you there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with this sentence, but nobody speaks like this. The way people speak this sentence is Raju ko kalam chahiye. So ask somebody, I want to say a sentence in Hindi, Raju wants a pen. How do we say that sentence in Hindi? And if you speak a language other than Hindi, check your own language. In Hindi, we say Raju wants a pen as Raju ko kalam chahiye, which literally means Raju needs a pen. So in Hindi, the distinction between want and need, that is required, is very critical. Hindi speakers, cognitively speaking, do not want to express desire in the form of want for worldly objects. Hear me out carefully. There is nothing ungrammatical about sentence number 3. But this looks odd because it uses a verb want. Chahta hai. The same sentence becomes good if you replace kalam. So kalam is an example of a worldly object. Take any object, kalam chahta hai, kapra chahta hai, paisa chahta hai. They are not good. They are not suitable in this sentence. But if you use anything else other than these objects, then the sentence is going to be good. You can say, Raju jana chahta hai. That's perfectly fine. Raju khana chahta hai. Raju पीना चाहता है. We don't say that usually in Hindi. That's another thing which I will use as a footnote here and discuss some other time. It's a unique thing about world's languages that pina is a transitive verb. But if you drop the object from the sentence, then the absence of object in the context of pina that is drinking, refers to alcohol. So if you say Raju peena chahta hai, that means Raju wants to drink alcohol. And if you don't want your sentence to mean that, you need to specify what peena chahta hai. Wants to drink what? So you have to say Raju wants to drink juice, or Raju wants to drink water, or Raju wants to drink milk, or whatever you want. You need to specify it, because in the absence of it, it means drinking. That's an additional point, and that works for all the languages of the world, not just English. So that not just Hindi, it works the same way in English. You can say Raju wants to drink. Unless you specify the object in English too, it refers to drinking alcohol. So that's a similarity between the two. But we were talking about differences, and we are trying to make a different point. We are saying if the object is immaterial things like jana, ana, khana, dekhna, peena, then the sentence is fine. Raju घर जाना चाहता है, Raju डिनर खाना चाहता है, Raju जूस पीना चाहता है, Raju मूवी देखना चाहता है, Raju सोना चाहता है, Raju बैठना चाहता है. All those things are fine. But Raju कलम चाहता है is not good. Raju पैसा चाहता है is not good. Raju गाड़ी चाहता है is not good. If you say गाड़ी खरीदना चाहता है, then it is fine. Now, the point is, what explains this nuanced difference between Hindi and English? Hindi speakers, this is my explanation. It may not match with yours or anybody else, but I invite you to check. And my explanation is, particularly for Hindi speakers do not want to express their desire. They do not want to verbalize their desire in direct sentences. So, how does it work? They convert it as a requirement. So they will say, Raju ko kalam chahiye, meaning Raju needs a pen. And for that there is a different verb that is used in Hindi, which is chahiye. Chahiye is a frozen verb in Hindi. It doesn't change according to tense of the sentence. And it's an indirect sentence because there is a postposition ko right after Raju. So, Raju, there is no agreement between this and this verb. So, whether it is Raju ko kalam chahiye, or Sarita ko kalam chahiye, or Rani ko kalam chahiye, it's the same. The gender of the subject will not have anything to do with the verb. Verb is frozen and it's an indirect expression. It's a technique of making it a requirement. So, in Hindi, we want to say I want, but we convert it into need. That's the only way to say this thing in Hindi. Having explained this to you, for Hindi, I want to say this pattern is not applicable for English. We can simply say Raju wants money, Raju wants a shirt, Raju wants a pen, or Raju wants to go. Raju wants to drink, Raju wants to sleep, Raju wants to eat. All those things are possible in Hindi. I'm sorry, all those things are possible. All those structures are possible in English. And we can also say, in terms of requirements in English, Raju needs a pen. So, Raju wants a pen or Raju needs a pen. This distinction is possible in two different sentences in English, but it works in a very different way in Hindi. I am sure it works in different ways in many other languages, but due to time, I'm unable to discuss examples from other languages. However, I invite you to look at examples from other languages for yourself. So, my point is, through these two examples, 4 sentences, a set of 2 sentences for 2 different examples that I have given you, we need to know a lot about socio-cultural context, embedded meaning, embedded structure, embedded patterns. to see nuances of a structure and embedded socio-cultural context of our own language as to learn a new language. I have discussed this before, but I'll bring this example again to you. Ghar aao. If we want to say ghar aao, come home. It's not necessary when we use imperative sentences. Imperative sentences are called request and orders. A sentence becomes a request or an order depending upon the context. Again, socio-cultural context, social context, and we need to know that. So when we say ghar aao to a friend, we are not necessarily ordering a friend. It's a quite decent invitation. It's a quite decent expression without any order as a request to a friend or to an acquainted person whom we can use a informal sentence in that context. However, the formal counterpart of this sentence in Hindi is ghar aiye. Ghar aiye, which means please come home. It's a higher degree for the first imperative, number 5. In this one, the subject is tum. In this one, the subject is aap. And that's the distinction between informal and formal. So basically we are saying example number 5 is informal and example number 6 is formal. We need to know this distinction, not in terms of order and request, because 5 is not necessarily an order and 6 is not necessarily a request. You change the context. If you are the boss and you tell even your junior employee a formal sentence, kal subah miliye, this is not a request for that employee. For that employee, it's an order. So, when interpreting socio-cultural context in a given language, we need to know the embedded context of that language. At the same time, we need to learn the same thing for the target language as well. So, and it works the same way in English too. When we talk to an employee and say, please see me tomorrow in the morning, that is not simply a request, meaning that doesn't give an option to that employee. At the same time, if I say, see me tomorrow to a friend, it's not an order. So the context tells us a lot, and the point that I am trying to make here is learning about the context happens simultaneously with learning about structural nuances. And these two things work together, which we need to pay attention to. Need to talk about one more example with you, which comes from the context of negation, and I'm again using few Hindi sentences for you. Hopefully, it will become clearer. Look at sentence number 7. It says, आपने कहा आप आइसक्रीम खरीदेंगे. You said you will buy ice cream. So this is a sentence in Hindi. This is word by word meaning in the second sentence. First sentence is Hindi, second sentence is word by word meaning, and third is English. So one is Hindi and third is English and 2 is meaning word by word. So it says, you said you will buy me an ice cream. In response, so number 7 I have brought in just to build the context. So keep this number 7 sentence in mind. In response to number 7, if I say as number 8, मैंने कब कहा? That is, when did I say? This when did I say, though it's a question sentence, it means in this context, I did not say so. Meaning, I did not say I will buy ice cream. So look at this discourse competence. This is called pragmatic competence that a learner develops in the process of learning, which is important to build the context, and that comes from the situation like this. We are actually using a question sentence. When did I say? Meaning, I did not say so. So, there is another level, another layer here. In response to the sentence, आपने कहा आप आइसक्रीम खरीदेंगे. We don't want to say, I did not say so. Meaning, we don't want to refute somebody's expectation. We refute the expectation by converting the sentence into a question. When did I say? Meaning, I did not say so. Also, we can say, मैंने कहाँ कहा? Literally means, where did I say? Implication is, I did not say so. So, to imply what we want to say, sometimes we use a different structure, namely questions here. So, if you see this implicature, it's an important topic, it's a big thing in language. How we employ, that is what we mean. We say something, that is we use a particular type of sentence. We could possibly mean something else by saying that sentence. Somebody says, let's go watch a movie today. If I say, I have to go shopping. In response to, let's go watch a movie today, if I say, I have to go shopping. It's not an information to the hearer that I have to go shopping. The hearer may not be interested in my act of shopping or the types of shopping. It's a very different kind of information to the hearer, which implies no. We use this as a marker of politeness instead of saying no. No, I can't go. To avoid that, which sounds confrontational, negative, we use a strategy of giving another kind of information which hearer interprets from the knowledge of the context very clearly that the answer is no. And nobody makes this mistake. This is applicable in English too. So, to conclude this part, the purpose of this discussion with you is to understand that building grammatical competence, understanding nuances of patterns, and understanding nuances of pattern for grammatical accuracy in speaking has to come along with pragmatic competence. And only then does we get successful in building communicative confidence for us in the target language. Just wanted to describe few examples through these patterns with these theoretical nuances for you to take a look at these things. I am sure this is going to be useful to you. As I said in the beginning, usually these things are important for teachers to keep in mind, but I believe it helps learners to see what is the embedded theme of the entire discussion. And when you know these things inside out, categorically, as an obvious thing to you, maybe it will add to better learning and improving of English, which is one of the targets of this course. I am sure it will work in that direction. Thank you so much.